This is Audible.
Brilliance Audio presents What the Wind Knows by Amy Harmon, performed by Saskia Marleveld and Will Dameron. Let us go forth, the tellers of tales, and seize whatever prey the heart long for, and have no fear. Everything exists, everything is true, and the earth is only a little dust under our feet. W.B. Yeats. Prologue. November, 1976. Grandfather, tell me about your mother. He was silent as he smoothed my hair, and for a long time I thought he hadn't heard me. She was beautiful. Her hair was dark, her eyes green, just like yours are. Do you miss her? Tears leaked out the sides of my eyes and made his shoulder wet beneath my cheek. I missed my mother desperately. Not anymore, my grandfather soothed. Why? I was suddenly angry with him. How could he betray her that way? It was his duty to miss her. Because she is still with me. This made me cry even harder. Hush now, Annie. Be still. Be still. If you're crying, you won't be able to hear. Hear what? I gulped, slightly distracted from my anguish. The wind. It's singing. I perked up, lifting my head slightly, listening for what my grandfather could hear. I don't hear a song, I contended. Listen closer. Maybe it's singing for you. It howled and hurried, pressing against my bedroom window. I hear the wind, I confessed, allowing the sound to lull me. But it isn't singing a very pretty song. It sounds more like it's shouting. Maybe the wind is trying to get your attention. Maybe it has something very important to say, he murmured. It doesn't want me to be sad? I proposed. Yes, exactly. When I was little, about your age, I was very sad too. And someone told me everything would be okay because the wind already knew. Already knew what? I asked, confused. He sang a line from a song I'd never heard, in a voice both warm and rolling. The wind and waves remember him still. He stopped singing abruptly, as if he didn't know what came next. Remember who still? I pressed. Everyone who has ever lived. The wind and the water already know, he said softly. Know what? Everything. The wind you hear is the same wind that has always blown. The rain that falls is the same rain, over and over, round and round, like a giant circle. The wind and the waves have been present since time began. The rocks and stars, too. But the rocks don't speak, and the stars are too far away to tell us what they know. They can't see us. No, probably not. But the wind and water know all the earth's secrets. They've seen and heard all that has ever been said or done. And if you listen, they will tell you all the stories and sing every song. The stories of everyone who has ever lived. Millions and millions of lives. Millions and millions of stories. Do they know my story? I asked, stunned. Yes, he whispered on a sigh, and smiled down into my upturned face. And yours, too? Oh, yes. Our stories belong together, Annie lass. Your story is a special one. It might take your whole life to tell it. Both of our lives. 1. Ephemera. Ah, do not mourn, he said, that we are tired, For other loves await us. Hate on and love through unrepining hours. Before us lies eternity, our souls, our love, and a continual farewell. W.B. Yeats. June, 2001. They say that Ireland is built on her stories. Fairies and folklore inhabited Ireland much longer than the English, or even Patrick and the priests. My grandfather, Owen Gallagher, pronounced Gallagher, not Gallagher, valued the story above all else, and he taught me to do the same. For it is in the legends and tales that we keep our ancestors, our culture, and our history alive. We turn memories into stories, and if we don't, we lose them. If the stories are gone, then the people are gone too. Even as a child, I found myself entranced by the past, wishing I knew the stories of the people who had come before me. Maybe it was due to an early acquaintance with death and loss, but I knew someday I would be gone too, and no one would remember that I had ever lived. The world would forget. It would go on, shaking itself free of those who had been, sloughing off the old for the new. The tragedy of it all was more than I could bear, the tragedy of lives beginning and ending with no one remembering. Owen was born in County Leitrim in 1915, 9 months before the famed Easter Rising that changed Ireland forever. His parents, my great-grandparents, died in that rebellion, and Owen was orphaned without knowing either of them. We were alike in that way, my grandfather and I, both orphaned young, his loss cycling into mine, my loss becoming his. I was only 6 years old when I lost my parents. I was a little girl with a tied tongue and an overly active imagination, and Owen stepped in, rescued me, and raised me. When I struggled to get the words out, my grandfather would hand me a pen and paper. "If you can't say them, write them. They last longer that way. Write all your words, Annie. Write them and give them somewhere to go." And so I have. But this story is like no other tale I've ever told, no story I've ever written. It is the history of my family, woven into the fabric of my past, etched in my DNA, and seared into my memory. It all began, if there is a beginning, when my grandfather was dying. "There's a locked drawer in my desk," my grandfather said. "Yes, I know," I teased, as if the locked drawer had been something I'd been trying to break into. I'd actually had no idea. I hadn't lived in Owen's Brooklyn brownstone for a long time, and hadn't called him grandfather for even longer. He was just Owen now, and his locked drawers were of no concern to me. "Don't sass, lass," Owen chided, repeating a line I'd heard 1,000 times in my life. "The key is on my fob. The smallest one. Will you get it?" I did as he asked, following his instructions and pulling the contents from the drawer. A large manila envelope sat atop a box filled with letters, hundreds of them, neatly ordered and bundled. I paused over the letters for a moment, noting that none of them appeared to have ever been opened. A small date was written in the corner of each one, and that was all. "Bring the manila envelope to me," Owen instructed, not raising his head from the pillow. He'd grown so weak in the last month he rarely left his bed. I set the box of letters aside, picked up the envelope, and returned to him. I opened the clasp on the envelope and carefully upended it. A handful of loose pictures and a small leather-bound book slid out onto the bed. A brass button, the top rounded and dull with time, rolled out of it last, and I picked it up, fingering the innocuous item. "What's this, Owen?" "That button belonged to Sean McDermott," he rasped, a glint in his eye. "The Sean McDermott?" "The one and only." "How did you get it?" "It was given to me. Turn it over. His initials are scratched into it. See?" I held the button to the light, turning it this way and that. Sure enough, a tiny S followed by a McD marred the surface. "The button was from his coat. Owen began, but I knew the story. I'd been steeped in research for months, trying to get a feel for Irish history for a novel I was working on. He carved his initials into his coat buttons and a few coins and gave them to his girlfriend, Min Ryan, the night before he was executed by a firing squad for his involvement in the Rising, I said, awed by the tiny piece of history I held in my hand.
That's right,
Owen said, a small smile flitting over his lips.
He was from County Leitrim, where I was born and raised. He travelled the country, setting up branches of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. He was the reason my parents became involved.
Unbelievable, I breathed. You should have the button authenticated and put it somewhere safe, Owen. This has got to be worth a small fortune.
It's yours now, Annie lass. You can decide what happens to it. Just promise me that you won't give it to someone who won't understand its significance.
My eyes met his, and my excitement over the button fizzled and fell. He looked so tired. He looked so old. And I wasn't ready for him to rest. Not yet. But I don't know if I understand it, Owen, I whispered.
Understand what?
Its significance. I wanted to keep him talking, to keep him awake, and I rushed to fill the void his weariness left in me. I've been reading about Ireland, biographies and documentaries and collections and diaries. I've been doing research for 6 months. I have so much information in my head, and I don't know what to do with it. The history after the 1916 Easter Rising is just a garbled mess of opinions and blame. There's no consensus. Owen laughed, but the sound was brittle and mirthless.
And that, my love, is Ireland.
It is? That was so sad, so disheartening.
So many opinions and so few solutions. And all the opinion in the world doesn't change the past.
Owen sighed. I don't know what story I'm going to tell. I'll arrive at one opinion only to be swayed by another. I feel hopeless.
That is how the people of Ireland felt too. That's one of the reasons I left.
Owen's hand had found the book with the worn leather cover, and he caressed it the way he'd stroked my head when I was a child. For a moment we were silent, lost in our own thoughts. Do you miss it? Do you miss Ireland? I asked. It wasn't something we'd talked about. My life, our life together, was in America, in a city as alive and vibrant as Owen's blue eyes. I knew very little about my grandfather's life before me, and he'd never been eager to enlighten me.
I miss her people. I miss her smell and her green fields. I miss the sea and the timelessness. She is timeless. She hasn't changed much. Don't write a book about Ireland's history, Annie. There are plenty of those. Write a love story.
I still have to have context, Owen, I argued, smiling.
Yes, you do. But don't let the history distract you from the people who lived it.
Owen picked up one of the pictures, his fingers trembling as he brought it close to his face to better study it.
There are some paths that inevitably lead to heartache, some acts that steal men's souls, leaving them wandering forever after without them, trying to find what they lost,
he murmured, as if quoting something he'd once heard, something that had resonated with him. He gave me the picture in his hand. Who is this? I asked, staring down at the woman who gazed fiercely back at me.
That is your great-grandmother, Anne Finnegan Gallagher.
Your mother? I asked.
Yes,
he breathed. I look a lot like her, I said, delighted. The clothes she wore and the style of her hair made her an exotic foreign creature, but the face looking up at me from decades past could have been my own.
Yes, you do. Very much,
Owen said. She's a little intense, I observed.
Smiling wasn't the thing to do in those days.
Ever?
No,
he chortled.
not ever. Just not in pictures. We tried very hard to look more dignified than we were. Everyone wanted to be a revolutionary.
And is that my great-grandfather? I pointed at the man standing next to Anne in the next picture.
Yes, my father, Declan Gallagher.
Declan Gallagher's youth and vitality were preserved in the yellowed print. I liked him immediately and felt a surprising pang in my chest. Declan Gallagher was gone, and I would never know him. Owen handed me another picture, a photo of his mother, his father, and a man I didn't recognize. Who's he? The stranger was dressed like Declan, formally in a three-piece suit, a fitted vest peeking out from behind his lapels. His hands were in his pockets, and his hair was slicked back in careful waves, and was short on the sides and longer on top. Brown or black, I couldn't tell. His brow was furrowed slightly, as if he wasn't comfortable having his picture taken.
That is Dr. Thomas Smith, my father's best friend. I loved him almost as much as I love you. He was like a father to me.
Owen's voice was soft, and his eyes fluttered closed again. He was? My voice rose in surprise. Owen had never talked about this man. Why haven't you shown me these pictures, Owen? I've never seen any of them before.
There are more,
Owen murmured, ignoring my question, as if it required too much energy to explain. I moved on to the next picture in the pile. There was a picture of Owen as a young boy, his eyes wide, his face freckled, and his hair slicked down. He wore short pants and long socks, a vest and a little suit coat. He had a cap in his hands. A woman stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders, her mouth grim. She might have been handsome, but she looked too suspicious to smile. Who's she?
My grandmother, Bridget Gallagher. My father's mother. We called her Nana.
How old were you here?
6. Nana was very unhappy with me that day. I didn't want to take a picture without the rest of my family, but she insisted on a picture with just the two of us.
And this one? I picked up the next photo. Tell me about this one. That's your mother. Her hair is longer here, and the doctor, right? My heart fluttered in my chest as I stared at it. Thomas Smith was looking down at the woman beside him, as if at the last moment he'd been unable to resist. Her gaze was cast down as well, a secret smile on her lips. They weren't touching, but they were very aware of each other. And there was no one else in the picture with them. The picture was oddly candid for the time period. Was Thomas Smith in love with Anne? I stammered, strangely breathless.
Yes. No,
Owen said softly, and I looked up at him with a scowl. What kind of answer is that? I asked.
A truthful one.
But she was married to your father. And didn't you say he was Declan's best friend?
Yes,
Owen sighed. Oh, wow. There's a story there, I crowed.
Yes, there is,
Owen whispered. He closed his eyes, his mouth quavering.
A wonderful story. I can't look at you without remembering.
That's a good thing, isn't it? I asked. Remembering is good.
Remembering is good,
he agreed, but the words came out with a grimace, and he clutched at the covers. When was the last time you took a pain pill? I asked, my voice sharp. I dropped the pictures and rushed the pills stacked on his bathroom counter. I took one out with anxious hands and filled a glass of water, then lifted Owen's head and helped him drink it down. I'd wanted him to be in a hospital, surrounded by people who could take care of him. He'd wanted to be home with me. He'd spent his life in hospitals, caring for the sick and dying. When he was diagnosed with cancer 6 months ago, he'd calmly announced he would not be receiving treatment. His only concession to my tearful ranting and cajoling was that he would manage his pain.
You need to go back, Annie lass, he said a while later,
the pill making his voice dreamlike and soft. Where? I asked, heavy-hearted.
To Ireland.
Go back? Owen, I've never been, remember?
I need to go back too. Will you take me?
He slurred. I've been wanting to go to Ireland with you all my life, I whispered. You know that. When should we go?
When I die, you'll take me back.
The pain in my chest was a physical thing, biting and twisting, and I bore down to combat it, to extinguish it. But it grew like Medusa's hair, the writhing tendrils slipping up and out of my eyes in hot, wet rivulets.
Don't cry, Annie,
Owen said, his voice so weak that I did my best to quell the tears, if only to save him from distress.
There is no end to us. When I die, take my ashes back to Ireland and set me loose in the middle of Lough Gill.
Ashes? In the middle of a lake? I asked, trying to smile. Don't you want to be buried near a church?
The church just wants my money, but I hope God will take my soul. What's left of me belongs in Ireland.
The windows rattled, and I rose to pull the drapes. Rain beat against the panes, a late spring storm that had been threatening the east coast all week.
The wind is howling like the hound of Cullen,
Owen murmured. I love that story, I said, sitting back down beside him. His eyes were closed, but he continued to speak, softly musing like he was remembering.
You told me the story of Cuchulainn, Annie. I was afraid, and you let me sleep in your bed. The dog kept watch all night long. I could hear the hound in the wind.
Owen, I didn't tell you the story of Cuchulainn. You told me, so many times. You told me, I corrected him, straightening his blankets. He clutched at my hand.
Yes, I told you. You told me, and you will tell me again. Only the wind knows which truly comes first.
He drifted off, and I held his hand, listening to the storm, lost in memories of us. I was 6 years old when Owen became my anchor and my caretaker. He'd held me while I wept for parents who weren't coming back. I wished desperately that he could hold me again, that we could start over, if only to have him with me for another lifetime. How will I live without you, Owen? I mourned aloud.
You don't need me any more. You're all grown up,
he murmured, surprising me. I thought he was fast asleep. I'll always need you, I cried, and his lips trembled again, acknowledging the devotion that underscored my words.
We'll be together again, Annie.
Owen had never been religious, and his words surprised me. He'd been raised by a devout Catholic grandmother, but left the religion behind when he left Ireland at 18. He'd insisted I attend a Catholic school in Brooklyn, but that was the extent of my religious upbringing. Do you really believe that? I whispered.
I know it,
he said, opening his heavy eyelids and regarding me solemnly. I don't know it. I love you so much, and I'm not ready to let you go. I was crying in earnest, already feeling his loss, my loneliness, and the years that stretched before me without him.
You're beautiful, smart, rich, he laughed weakly. And you did it all by yourself, you and your stories. I'm so proud of you, Annie lass, so proud. But you don't have a life beyond your books. You don't have love.
His eyes clouded and searched the space beyond my head.
Not yet. Promise me you'll go back, Annie.
I promise. After that he slept, but I could not. I stayed by his side, hungry for his presence, for the words he might say, for the comfort I'd always drawn from him. He awoke once more, panting from the pain, and I helped him swallow another pill.
Please, please, Amy. You must go back. I need you so badly. We both do.
What are you talking about, Owen? I'm right here. Who needs me? He was delirious, floating in pain, beyond sentience, and I could only hold his hand and pretend I understood. Sleep now, Owen. The pain will be easier to bear.
Don't forget to read the book. He loved you. He loved you so much. He's been waiting, Annie.
Who, Owen? I couldn't hold back the tears, and they dripped onto our clasped hands.
I miss him. It's been so long.
He sighed deeply, his eyes never opening. What he saw was in his memory, in his pain, and I let him ramble until the mumbled words became shallow breaths and restless dreams. The night ended, and the day dawned, but Owen didn't wake again.
2 May, 1916. He's dead. Declan is dead. Dublin is in ruins. Sean McDiarmid is in Kilmainham jail awaiting the firing squad, and I don't know what's become of Anne. Yet here I sit, filling the pages of this book as though it will bring them all back. Every detail is a wound, but they are wounds I feel compelled to reopen, to examine, if only to make sense of it all. And someday, little Owen will need to know what happened. I intended to fight. I started Easter Monday with a rifle in my hands that I put down and never picked up again. From the moment we stormed into the General Post Office, I was up to my elbows in blood and chaos in the makeshift first aid post. There was very little organization and a great deal of excitement, and for the first few days no one knew what to do. But I knew how to bind wounds and staunch blood flow. I knew how to make a splint and dig out a bullet. For 5 days, under constant shelling, that's what I did. I moved through the days in a dream, never resting, so tired I could have slept on my feet, my head bobbing in time with the artillery rounds. Through it all, I couldn't believe it was happening. Declan was euphoric, and Anne was moved to tears when the gunboat started firing on Sackville Street, as if the use of big weapons solidified our dreams of a rebellion. She was sure the British were finally listening. I teetered between pride and despair, between my boyhood dreams of nationalism and Irish rebellion, and the sheer destruction being meted out. I knew it was futile, but I was compelled through friendship or loyalty to take part, even if my part was only to see that the rebels, the whole ragtag, idealistic, fatalistic lot, had someone looking after their wounded. Declan had made Anne promise to stay out of harm's way. She, Bridget, and little Owen were holed up in my house in Montjoy Square when Declan and I joined the volunteers marching through the streets, intent on carrying out our revolution. Anne joined Declan in the GPO on Wednesday, kicking in a window and climbing over the jagged edge to reach him. She hadn't even noticed the blood streaming from a slice on her left leg and palm from the broken glass, until I made her sit so I could tend to it. She told Declan that if he was going to die, she was going to die with him. Rage and threaten as he would, she turned a deaf ear, and made herself useful playing messenger between the GPO and Jacob's factory, since no one would give her a gun. The women were much more able to move about without being questioned or fired upon. I don't know when her luck gave out. The last time I saw her was early Friday morning, when the flames creeping down both sides of Abbey Street made abandoning the post office unavoidable. I had started evacuating the wounded to Jervis Street Hospital with a stretcher I'd begged off a St. John ambulance worker. He gave me 3 Red Cross armlets as well, so that we wouldn't be fired upon or stopped as we moved south on Henry Street to Jervis and back again. Connolly's ankle was shattered, but he wouldn't leave. I left him in the care of Jim Ryan, a medical student who'd been there since Tuesday. I made the trip 3 times before darkness fell, and barricades prevented 2 volunteers, boys from Cork who'd come to Dublin to join the fight, and me from returning. I told the boys to get out of the city, to start walking. The rebellion was over, and they were needed at home. Then I went back to the Jervis Street Hospital and found an empty corner, folded my coat beneath my head, and collapsed. only to be awakened by a nurse who was certain that the hospital was going to be evacuated due to the flames that had followed me from the GPO. I went back to sleep, too spent to care. When I awoke, the fire had been contained, and the rebel forces had surrendered. The staff at Jervis Street Hospital told the British soldiers that I was a surgeon when they came to round up the insurgents, and miraculously I wasn't detained. Instead, I spent the rest of the day attending to the dead and dying on Morris Street, where 40 men had tried to secure a line of retreat from the burning GPO. Civilians and rebels alike had been mowed down by Crown forces. Women, children, and old men had been caught in the crossfire, and their dead faces were covered in soot. Flies buzzed round their heads. Some of them burned beyond recognition. In my heart of hearts, I could not divorce myself from some of the blame. It is one thing to fight for freedom. It is another to condemn the innocent to die in your war. That is where I found Declan. I said his name, ran my hands down his blackened cheeks, and he opened his eyes to my voice. My heart leapt. I thought for a minute I might be able to save him. "You'll take care of Owen, won't you, Thomas? You'll take care of Owen and my mother. And Anne. Look after Anne. Where is she, Declan? Where's Anne?" But then his eyes closed, and his breath rattled in his throat. I lifted him up, over my shoulder, and ran for help. He was gone, I knew it, but I carried him to the Jervis Street Hospital, demanded a place to lay him down, and washed the blood and grit from his skin and hair, and straightened his clothes. I bandaged his wounds, which would never heal, and then I carried him through the streets again, up Jervis, across Parnell, through Gardiner Row, and into Mountjoy Square. Nobody stopped me. I carried a dead man on my shoulders through the centre of town, and the people were so shell-shocked they looked the other way. I don't think Declan's mother, Bridget, will ever recover. The only person who might love Declan more than Anne is Bridget. I am taking him home to Dromahair. Bridget wants to bury him in Ballinagar, beside his father. And then I'll come back to Dublin for Anne. God forgive me for leaving her behind. T.S.
2. The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go for now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. W. B. Yeats. I flew into Dublin, smuggling the urn of Owen's ashes in my suitcase. I had no idea if there were international laws, or Irish laws, about transporting the dead, and decided I didn't want to know. My suitcase was waiting for me at the baggage claim, and I double-checked to make sure the urn hadn't been confiscated before renting a car to drive northwest to Sligo, where I would stay for a few days while I explored nearby Dromahair. I hadn't adequately prepared myself to drive on the wrong side of the road, and spent much of the 3-hour journey to Sligo weaving across the road and screaming in terror, unable to enjoy the landscape for fear I would miss a sign or hit an oncoming car. I rarely drove in Manhattan. There was no reason to own a car. But Owen had insisted I learn how and get a driver's license. He said freedom was the ability to go wherever your heart called, and growing up we'd driven up and down the East Coast on little vacations and adventures. The summer I turned 16, we spent July crossing the entire United States, starting in Brooklyn and ending in Los Angeles. That is when I learned to drive, traversing long stretches of highway between small towns that I would never see again, over rolling hills, through the red cliffs of the West, across the expanse of nothing and everything, with Owen at my side. I'd memorized Byla and Allen by Yeats as we drove, a narrative poem filled with legend and longing, death and trickery, and love that transcended life. Owen had held the dog-eared copy of Yeats's poetry, listening to me stumble through lines, gently correcting me, and helping me pronounce the Gaelic names of the old legends, until I could deliver each line and verse like I had lived it. I had a passion for Yeats, for his love for the actress Maud Gonne, who gave her love to a revolutionary instead. Owen let me ramble on about things I thought I understood, but only romanticized, like philosophy and politics and Irish nationalism. Someday, I told him, I wanted to write a novel set in Ireland during the Rising of 1916.
Tragedy makes for great stories, but I'd much rather your story, the one you live, not the one you write, be filled with joy. Don't revel in tragedy, Annie. Rejoice in love. And once you find it, don't let it go. In the end, it is the one thing you won't regret.
Owen had said. I was not interested in love beyond what I could read on a page. I spent the next year pestering Owen to take me to Ireland, to Dromahair, the little town where he'd been born. I wanted to attend the Yeats Festival in Sligo, which Owen said wasn't far from Dromahair, and perfect my Gaelic. Owen had insisted I learn, and it was the language of us, our life together. Owen had refused. It was one of the few times we fought. I spoke in a bad Irish accent for 2 months to torture him.
You're trying too hard, Annie. If you have to think about the way your tongue is moving in your mouth, then it doesn't sound natural,
he'd coached, wincing. I redoubled my efforts. I was relentless in my fixation. I wanted to go to Ireland. I went so far as to call a travel agent to help me. Then I presented the arrangements, complete with dates and pricing options, to Owen.
We're not going to Ireland, Annie. It's not time. Not yet,
he said, a stubborn set to his chin, rejecting my travel brochures and itineraries.
When will it be time? I wheedled. When you've grown.
What? But I'm grown now, I insisted, still holding on to the accent.
See there? That was perfect. Natural. No one would know you're an American, he said, attempting to distract me.
Owen, please. It's calling me, I moaned theatrically. But I was sincere in my fascination. It did call to me. I dreamed about it. I yearned for it.
I believe that, Annie. I believe it is, but we can't go back yet. What if we go and we never come back?
The thought had filled me with wonder. Then we'll stay. Ireland needs doctors. Why not? I could go to college in Dublin.
Our life is here now, Owen argued. The time will come, but not now, Annie.
Then we'll just visit. Just a trip, Owen. And when it's over, no matter how much I love it and want to stay, we'll come home. I thought I was being so reasonable, and his adamancy confused me.
Ireland is not safe, Annie,
he said, losing his temper. The tips of his ears were red, and his eyes flashed.
We're not going. Jesus, Mary and Joseph, girl, let it go.
His anger was worse than a slap, and I ran to my room and slammed the door, crying and raging and making childish plans to run away. But he never yielded, and I was not a rebellious child. He'd never given me anything to rebel against. He didn't want to go to Ireland, didn't want me to go to Ireland, and out of love and respect for him, I eventually gave up. If his memories of Ireland hurt him so deeply, then how could I insist he return? I threw away the brochures, retired my Irish accent, and read Yeats only when I was alone. We'd kept up the Gaelic, but Gaelic didn't make me think of Ireland. It made me think of Owen, and Owen had urged me to pursue other dreams. I began to write my own stories, to craft my own tales. I wrote a novel set during the time of the Salem witch trials, a young adult book that I'd sold to a publisher at 18, and Owen had spent 2 weeks with me in Salem, Massachusetts, letting me research to my heart's content. I wrote a novel about the French Revolution through the eyes of Marie Antoinette's lady-in-waiting. Owen happily rearranged his schedule, reassigned his patients, and took me to France. We'd been to Australia, so I could write a story about the English prisoners who'd been sent there. We'd been to Italy, to Rome, so I could write a tale about a young soldier during the fall of the Roman Empire. We'd been to Japan, the Philippines, and Alaska, all in the name of research. But we had never gone to Ireland. I'd gone on dozens of trips by myself. I'd spent the last decade of my life absorbed in my work, crafting one story after another, traveling from one location to the next to research and write. I could have gone to Ireland alone, but I never did. The time never seemed right, and there were always other stories to tell. I'd been waiting for Owen, and now Owen was gone. Owen was gone, and I was finally in Ireland, driving on the wrong side of the road, with Owen's ghost in my head and his ashes in the trunk. The anger I'd felt as a 16-year-old girl, the injustice and confusion at his refusal, reared in my chest again. "Damn you, Owen! You should be here with me!" I cried, pounding on the wheel, my eyes filling with tears, causing me to narrowly miss plowing into a truck that swerved and blared its horn in warning. When I arrived at the Great Southern Hotel, a stately, pale yellow establishment built a few years after the Irish Civil War, in Sligo at sundown, I sat in the crowded parking area and said the rosary for the first time in years, grateful to be alive. I stumbled into the hotel, bags in tow, and after checking in, I climbed a staircase that reminded me of pictures of the Titanic, which was strangely symbolic of the sinking feeling I'd been battling since leaving New York. I collapsed onto the big bed, which was surrounded by heavy furniture and papered walls in various shades of purple, and fell asleep without even removing my shoes. I awoke 12 hours later, disoriented and starving, and stumbled to the bathroom to huddle in the ridiculously narrow tub, shivering while I tried to figure out how to turn the hot water on. Everything was different enough that it took a moment to adjust, but similar enough that I grew impatient with myself for the difficulty I was experiencing. An hour later, washed and dried, dressed and pressed, I took my keys and headed down the ornate staircase to the dining room below. I walked down the streets of Sligo in tragic wonder, the girl in me gaping at the smallest things, the grieving woman devastated that I was finally here and Owen wasn't with me. I walked down Wolfetone Street and over to Temple, where I stood beneath the bell tower of the enormous Sligo Cathedral, my head tipped back as I waited for it to ring. William Butler Yeats's face, with white hair and spectacles, was painted on a wall next to words that proclaimed this Yeats country. The painting made him look like Steve Martin, and I resented the tacky display. Yeats deserved more than a shoddy mural. I passed by the Yeats Museum in stony protest. The town sat higher than the sea, and here and there the long strand, glistening and bared by the tide, peeked out at me. I'd walked too long, not paying attention to how far I'd gone, my eyes gobbling up what was immediately around me. I ducked into a candy shop, needing sugar and directions back to the hotel, and to Dromahair if I was going to attempt another afternoon behind the wheel. The owner was a friendly man in his 60s, selling me on sour licorice and chocolate caramel clusters, and asking me about my visit to Sligo. My American accent gave me away. When I mentioned Dromahair and an ancestral search, he nodded. "It's not far away at all. 20 minutes or so. You'll want to take the loop around the lake. Stay on 286 until you see the sign for Dromahair. That's a pretty drive. And Park's Castle is along the route. It's worth stopping for." "Is the lake called Loch Gill?" I asked, catching myself just in time and pronouncing it correctly. Loch was pronounced like the Scottish loch. "That's the one." My chest ached, and I pushed thoughts of the lake away, not ready to think about ashes and goodbyes just yet. He pointed me back in the direction of the hotel, telling me to listen for the bell tower on the cathedral if I got turned around. As he rang up my purchases, he asked me about my family. "Gallagher, huh? There was a woman named Gallagher who drowned in Loch Gill. Oh, it had to be almost a century ago. My grandmother told me the story. They never found her body, but on a clear night, folks say you can sometimes see her walking on the water. We've got our own Lady of the Lake. I think Yeats wrote a poem about her. He even wrote about Dromahair, come to think." He stood among a crowd at Dromahair, his heart hung all upon a silken dress, and he had known at last some tenderness, before earth took him to her stony care, I quoted, lilting immediately into the Irish accent I'd perfected in my youth. I didn't know the poem about a ghost lady. It didn't ring any bells at all. But I knew the one about Owen's beloved Dromahair. "That's it. Not bad, lass. Not bad at all." I smiled and thanked him, popping a piece of chocolate in my mouth as I traipsed back across town to the hotel that reeked of time and bygone eras. The Candyman was right. The drive to Dromahair was beautiful. I plodded along, gripping the wheel and taking the turns slowly for my own safety and the safety of the unsuspecting Irish traveler. At times, greenery rose so thick on either side of me, I felt goaded by the canopy that threatened to enclose the road at every turn. Then the foliage broke, and the lake glimmered below, welcoming me home. I found an overlook and stopped the car, climbing onto the low rock wall that separated the road from the drop so I could drink it in. From the map I knew that Lough Gill was long, stretching from Sligo into County Leitrim. But from my vantage point, looking down on her eastern banks, she seemed intimate and enclosed, surrounded by squares of stone-lined farmland that rose from the banks and onto the hills on every side. An occasional home dotted the hills, but I didn't imagine the view could be much different from what it had been 100 years before. I could have easily climbed the wall and made my way down the long, grassy slope to reach the shore, though it might have been farther than it looked from above. I considered it, knowing I could take the urn with me and have the dreaded task behind me. Part of me wanted nothing more than to dip my toes in the placid blue and tell Owen I'd found his home. I resisted the call of the water, not knowing if the terrain to the lake shores was marshy beneath the grass that stretched below me. Being stuck up to my hips in boggy mud with Owen's urn was not in the plan. 10 minutes later, I was pulling down the main street of tiny Dromahair, searching for signs and symbols. I was not sure where to begin. I couldn't start knocking on doors, asking questions about people who had lived so long ago. I walked through a church cemetery, eyeing the names and dates, the clusters that indicated family, the flowers that indicated love. There were no Gallaghers in the small graveyard, and I climbed back into my car and continued down the main street until I saw a small sign that said library, underlined by an arrow pointing down a narrow lane, no bigger than an alleyway. It was little more than a stone cottage with 4 rough walls, a slate roof, and 2 dark windows. But libraries were great for research. I rolled to a stop in a gravel space not big enough for more than 3 patrons and turned off the car. Inside, it was smaller than my home office in Manhattan, and apartments in Manhattan were notoriously small, even when they cost $2 million. A woman, maybe a few years older than I, hunched over a novel, and books that needed to be reshelved were piled on her desk. She sat up and smiled vacantly, still lost in her story, and I stretched out my hand in greeting. "Hello. I know this is strange, but I thought maybe the library was a good place to start. My grandfather was born here in 1915. He said something about his father being a farmer. My grandfather went to America in the early 30s, and he never came back. I wanted to see—" I waved my hand helplessly toward the broad window that gave me a view of a little alleyway and not much else. "Where he was from, and maybe see where his parents are buried." "What was the family name?" "Gallagher," I said, hoping I wouldn't hear the story of the woman who drowned in the lake again. "That's a common enough name. My own mother was a Gallagher, but she's from Donegal." She stood and made her way around her desk and the piles of books she clearly had no room for. "We have a whole collection of books written by a woman named Gallagher." She stopped in front of a shelf and straightened a stack. "They were written in the early 20s, but professionally reprinted and donated to the library last spring. I've read them all. Delightful, really. All of them. She was ahead of her time." I smiled and nodded. Books by a woman with a common last name weren't exactly what I was looking for, but I didn't want to be rude. "What townland?" she asked expectantly. I stared at her blankly. "Townland? The land is divided up into townlands, and each one has a name. There are roughly 1,500 townlands in County Leitrim. You said your great-grandfather was a farmer." She smiled ruefully. "Everyone in rural Ireland was a farmer, lovey." I thought of the painfully small village I'd driven through, the cluster of homes, and the little main thoroughfare. "I don't know. Isn't there a cemetery? I thought I could just explore a bit. It's a small county, isn't it?" It was her turn to stare at me blankly. There are plots in every townland. If you don't know the townland, you'll never find the grave. And most of the older graves don't have headstones. It required money to have a headstone, and nobody had money. They just used markers. The family knows who was who. But I'm family and I have no idea, I blurted, oddly emotional. Jet lag, near-death experiences, and needles and haystacks were catching up to me. I'll call Maeve. She was the Killanumry Parish Secretary for almost 50 years, she offered, her eyes widening at my distress. Maybe there are some church records you could look through. If anyone knows something, it will be Maeve. She picked up the phone and dialed from memory, her eyes flitting uncomfortably between me and the stack of books on her desk. Maeve, this is Deirdre at the library. The book you've been waiting for is available. No, not that one. The one about the bad boy billionaire. Deirdre was silent, nodding, even though the woman she was speaking to couldn't know she was being agreed with. That's right. I peeked at it. You'll like it. Her eyes swung to me and away again. Maeve, I've got a woman here, all the way from America. She says she has family from the area. I was wondering if there are parish records she could look at. She's wanting to find where they're buried. She nodded again, sadly this time, and I guess Maeve was telling her what she already knew. You could go to Balnamore, Deirdre said, moving her mouth from the receiver, as if Maeve had instructed her to tell me immediately. There's a genealogical centre there. Maybe they can help. Are you staying in Sligo? I nodded in surprise. There's really nowhere to lodge around here, unless you've rented a room at the manor by the lake. But most people don't even know it's there. They don't advertise, Deirdre explained. I shook my head, indicating I had not known either, and Deirdre reported this to Maeve. The family name is Gallagher. She listened for a moment. I'll tell her. She pulled the receiver away from her mouth again. Maeve wants you to bring her the book about the billionaire and have some tea with her. She says you can tell her about your family, and maybe she'll think of something. She's as old as the hills, Deirdre whispered, muffling the receiver so Maeve wouldn't hear her commentary. But she remembers everything. The woman opened the door before I could knock. Her hair was so fine and wispy, it created a grey cloud around her head. Her glasses, rimmed in black and as thick as the palm of my hand, were wider than her face. She peered up at me through them with blinking blue eyes and pursed lips painted fuchsia. Maeve? I realized suddenly I didn't know her last name. I'm so sorry. Deirdre didn't tell me your full name. Can I call you Maeve? I know you, she said, her brow, already a topographic map of grooves and valleys, wrinkling even further. You do? I do. I stuck out my hand in greeting. Deirdre sent me. She didn't take it, but stepped back and waved me in. What was your name, lass? Just because I know your face doesn't mean I remember your name. She turned and tottered away, clearly expecting me to follow. I did, shutting the door behind me, a smell of damp and dust and cat dander wafting around me. Anne Gallagher, I said. I'm Anne Gallagher. I suppose I'm on a roots trip of sorts. My grandfather was born here, in Dromahare. I would really like to find where his parents are buried. Maeve was heading for a small table set for tea, tucked next to a pair of tall windows looking out over an overgrown garden. But when I said my name, she stopped abruptly, as though she'd forgotten her destination entirely. Owen, she said. Yes, Owen Gallagher was my grandfather. My heart cantered giddily. I took a few steps, not certain if she wanted me to sit for tea or remain standing. She was perfectly still for several moments, her back to me, her small figure framed by the afternoon light and frozen in remembrance or forgetfulness. I didn't know which. I waited for her to offer instruction or extend an invitation, hoping that she wouldn't forget she'd let a stranger into her home. I cleared my throat gently. Maeve? She said you'd come. Deirdre? Yes, she also sent your book. I dug it from my purse and took a few more steps.
Not Deirdre, goose. Anne. Anne said you'd come. Oh, I need tea. We'll have tea, she muttered, moving once again.
She sat at the table and looked at me expectantly. I debated making my excuses. I suddenly felt like I was caught in a Dickens novel, having tea with Miss Havisham. I had no desire to eat ancient wedding cake and drink Earl Grey in dusty teacups.
Oh, that's very kind of you, I hedged, setting the Bad Boy Billionaire book on the end table nearest me. Owen never came back to Drumahair. Not many do. There's a name for that, you know. They call it an Irish goodbye. But here you are, Maeve said, still staring at me.
I couldn't resist the lure of Owen's name. I set my bag down next to the chair across from her and slid into the seat. I tried not to look too closely at the little plate of cookies or the flowered plates and teacups. What I didn't know wouldn't hurt me.
Will you pour?
She asked primly.
Yes, I'd be glad to,
I stammered, trying to remember a moment when I'd felt more uncomfortably American. I mentally scrambled for the etiquette, trying to remember what came first.
Strong or weak? I asked. Strong.
My hand shook as I held the little strainer over her cup and filled it 3/4 full. Owen had always preferred tea. I could serve tea.
Sugar, lemon, or milk? I asked.
She sniffed.
Plain.
I bit my lip to hide my gratitude, splashed a little tea in my own cup, and wished for wine. She raised the tea to her lips and drank with disinterest, and I followed her lead.
Did you know Owen well?
I asked, after we'd both set our saucers down.
No, not really. He was much younger than I, and a little scamp at that.
Owen was younger than Maeve. Owen was just shy of 86 when he died. I tried to calculate what much younger might mean.
I'm 92, Maeve supplied. My mother lived to be 103. My grandmother was 98. My great-grandmother was so old, no one really knew exactly how old she was. We were glad to see the old one go.
I hid my snort of laughter in a demure cough.
Let me look at you,
she demanded, and I raised my eyes to hers obediently.
I can't believe it. You look just like her, she marveled.
Like Owen's mother.
Like Anne, she agreed. It's uncanny.
I've seen pictures. The resemblance is strong. But I'm surprised you remember. You would have been a very little girl when she died.
No.
She shook her head.
Oh, no. I knew her well.
I was told Declan and Anne Gallagher died in 1916. Owen was raised by his grandmother, Bridget, Declan's mother.
No,
she disagreed, drawing out the word as she shook her head.
Anne came back. Not right away, mind you. I remember how folks talked about her after she returned. There were some rumours, speculation about where she'd been. But she came back.
I stared at the old woman, stunned. My grandfather didn't tell me, I stammered. She considered this, nodding and drinking her tea, her eyes cast down, and I gulped my own, my heart racing from a sense of betrayal.
Maybe I am confused, she retracted softly. Don't let the ramblings of an old woman cause you to doubt.
It was a long time ago, I offered.
Yes, it was. And memory's a funny thing. It plays tricks on us.
I nodded, relieved that she had withdrawn her assertions so easily. For a moment she had seemed so sure, and her confidence had made mine crumble.
They're buried at Balnagar, that I'm sure of.
I rushed to retrieve my little notebook and a pencil from my bag. How do I get there?
Well, now, it's a pretty walk from here, or a short drive, maybe 10 minutes or less. Go south on the main street, just there, see?
She pointed toward the front door. It'll take you straight out of town, about 3 kilometres. You're going to veer right at the fork and continue for half a kilometre or so. Then go left, go a wee bit farther. Then the church, St. Mary's, will be on your left. The cemetery is there too, behind it. I'd stopped writing after she'd said to veer right. Don't these streets have names? Well, they're not streets, dear. They're roads. And people around here just know. If you get lost, pull over and ask someone. They'll know where the church is. And you can always pray. God always hears our prayers when we're wanting a church.
15 May, 1916. The drive to Dromahair with Declan's body wrapped and secured to the running board of the car was the longest of my life. Bridget would not speak, and the baby was inconsolable, as though he felt the black of our despair. After I dropped them at Garvaglebe, I took Declan to Father Darby for burial. We laid him to rest in Ballinagar, next to his father. I purchased a stone that will be laid when the engraving is done. If Anne is dead, as I fear, we will bury her beside Declan, and they will share the stone. It is what they would have wanted. I returned to Dublin, though getting back into the city proved arduous. The British Army had declared martial law, and all the roads were cordoned with armoured vehicles and soldiers. I showed my papers and my medical bag, and they eventually let me pass. The hospitals are full of injured insurgents, soldiers, and civilians. Mostly civilians. The need is great enough, so they let me through when others were turned away. I searched the dead houses and the hospital morgues, Jervis Street, the Mater, St. Patrick Duns, even the women's hospital where I'd heard the rebels had gathered on the grass after they surrendered. A temporary field hospital had been assembled at Marion Square, and I went there as well, though nothing remained but the folks that resided in the homes nearby. They told me the wounded and dead had been taken, and they weren't sure where. Rumours of mass graves of the unidentified dead at the Glasnevin and Deansgrange cemeteries had me begging beleaguered groundsmen for names they couldn't provide. I was too late, they said, adding that the lists of the dead would be compiled and eventually posted in the Irish Times, though no one knew when. I searched the streets, walking down the burned-out shell of once grand buildings on Sackville, and trundling through endless ash that was still hot enough in some places to melt my shoes. On Moore Street, where I had found Declan, people moved in and out of the crumbling tenements. One, situated right in the centre, had taken a direct hit. It had collapsed in on itself, and children scrambled over the debris, searching for firewood and things they could sell. Then I saw Anne's shawl, a bright grass green that matched her eyes. When I saw her last, she'd been wearing it wrapped tightly around her shoulders and tucked into her skirt to keep it out of the way. A young girl wore it now, and it fluttered in the breeze like the tricolour flags we'd raised above the GPO as triumphant conquerors. Those flags were gone now, destroyed. Just like Declan and Anne. Senseless with fear and fatigue, I ran to the girl and demanded that she tell me where she'd found the shawl. She pointed to the rubble at her feet. She had a blank stare and old eyes, though she couldn't have been more than 15. "It was just here, buried under the bricks. It has a small hole, but I'm keeping it. This was my house, so it's mine now." She jutted out her chin, as though she thought I'd rip it from her. Maybe I would have. Instead, I spent the rest of the day in the tumbled pile of rock and walls, searching through debris, looking for Anne's body. When the sun set and I had nothing to show for my efforts, the girl removed the shawl and handed it to me. "I've changed my mind. You can have it. It might be all that's left of your lady." I could not hide my tears, and her eyes were not as ancient when she turned to go. Tomorrow, I'll go back to Dromahair and bury the shawl beside Declan. T.S.
3. The Stolen Child. For he comes, the human child, to the waters of the wild with a fairy, hand in hand, from a world more full of weeping than he can understand. W.B. Yeats. With my heart in my throat and my eyes peeled, I repeated Maeve's directions like a Gregorian chant. I found my way to Balnagar Cemetery and to the church that sat like a guardian over the graves. It was in the middle of empty fields, a parochial house behind it, and only the endless stone walls of Ireland and a smattering of cows keeping it company. I pulled into the empty lot in front of the church and stepped out into the tepid June afternoon. If Ireland had a summer, it hadn't arrived. Feeling as though I'd found Golgotha and seen Jesus on the cross. With tear-filled eyes and shaking hands, I pushed through the huge wooden doors into the empty chapel, where reverence and memory had seeped into the walls and the wooden pews. The high ceiling echoed with 1,000 christenings, countless deaths, and innumerable unions that stretched back beyond the dates on the nearby graves. I loved churches the way I loved cemeteries and books. All three were markers of humanity, of time, of life. I felt no censure or guilt, no heaviness or dread inside religious walls. I knew my experience was not widely shared, and perhaps that was because of Owen. He had always approached religion with respect and humor, an odd combination that valued the good and put the bad into perspective. My relationship with God was equally untroubled. I had heard once that our view of God has everything to do with those who taught us about him. Our image of him often reflected our image of them. Owen taught me about God, and because I loved and cherished Owen, I loved and cherished God. In school, I'd studied Catholicism, learned the catechisms and the history, and absorbed it the way I'd absorbed all my other subjects, cleaving to the things that resonated and setting aside the things that didn't. The nuns complained that religion was not a buffet from which I could select only certain dishes. I politely smiled and quietly disagreed. Life, religion, and learning were exactly that, a series of choices. If I had tried to consume everything that was presented to me all at once, I would have been too full too quickly, and all the flavors would have run together. Nothing would have made any sense in and of itself. I sat in the old church where generations of my ancestors may have worshipped, where prayers had been spoken, and hearts broken and healed. It all made sense for a small moment. Religion made sense, if only to add context to the struggle of life and death. The church was a monument to what had been, a connection to the past that comforted those in the present, and it comforted me. I climbed the slope beyond the church to where the cemetery stretched. It overlooked the spires and the winding road I'd just traveled. Some of the stones were tipped or sunken. Some were so covered with lichen and time that I couldn't make out names or dates. Other plots were new, lined by rocks and filled with mementos. The newer plots, newer deaths, rimmed the edges of the graveyard as if death rippled outward like a rock tossed in a lake. Those markers were clean, the marble smooth, the names easily read. Maeve had warned that the cemeteries in much of Ireland were a mix of ancient and recent, the connections familial, even if the relationship was centuries old. In Balnagar Cemetery, most of the graves, especially those higher up the rise, stood like petrified gnomes and hobbits amid the grass, peeping out at me and drawing me to them. I found my family beneath a tree, on the edge of an older section. The stone was a tall rectangle with the name Gallagher engraved at the base. Just above it were the names Declan and Anne. I stared, incredibly moved, and touched their names.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.